Okay, so everyone, this is Steve Drury.
We've met.
I'm I'm sure you all have a bunch of questions for him, and that's basically the purpose of this. But I just want to know, I think, what I would think if I were a normal audience member, which is, how did you do that?
Well, you just do it. I should save this for later, but I played this a couple times over the last season, and most memorably, it's October. That would be 9 months ago, January 20th. Um, yeah, exactly. And I had the chance to do a little talk afterwards, and my boy, who's 12, had plays piano and violin and trombone and used to sing, but he's 12 now. So, at one point we were just talking about it, and I said, well, be comfortable because it's going to go on for an hour. And he said, how can you do that? How can you play a piece that's an hour long and learn all of it? And I said, well, and telling this story at on January 20th to the audience that was there, I said, it's the same situation that currently faces all of us. It's a lot of hard work, and we just have to dedicate ourselves to it.
Yes, and it goes on a long
It
time.
goes on. It's hard work, and it doesn't stop.
Um, um, and is this Revolutionary Red?
It's my best shirt. My black shoes I left them in my office.
So
It's
So my question has to do with Zhevsky himself. You know, Zhevsky is an amazing pianist, and um, he plays this piece and inserts things. And so I've seen a 90-minute performance of his, and because these ideas are still fresh to him also, and sort of connecting this piece to the inauguration. You know, these wounds are open. So I just wonder if you've had a chance to play this piece for Zhevsky, to talk to him and to react with him, and if you could tell us.
Yeah, sure. I've played it with him in the audience a couple of times, and he's heard my recording, said very nice things about it. Most memorably in Arizona, where he was invited, I played, and also Sergio Ortega was invited, who composed the original theme. It's co-credited to the kind of folk rock indigenous South American group Quila Payon, but Ortega actually did 90% of the actual note writing. He's no longer with us, but he was actually also a kind of standard issue modernist composer through most of his life, but he contributed this song to the revolution is important. So that was kind of cool to have both of these guys there. And I was a little on the spot, and Jeffsky said, "Why did you put the cadenza 4 bars before I?" He said a little bit snarling. I said, "Because I think it sounds better." Ah, all right, and which is about the comments that he's given. He's not the kind to like look over your shoulder and say, "No, it has to be this way." He's like, do whatever you want. Interesting character.
I would say that from Zhevsky, that kind of snarl is like what passes for a compliment, you know.
I'm glad to hear that.
So I wonder, I'm sure you all have questions, or someone may have a question here, and we have a microphone to go around. So if you have questions, yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh,
Oh, hi. So, what part of the piece makes you the most nervous?
Starting it. There are sometimes the easiest parts are the hardest. I don't know if I could answer that. I'm kind of going to turn your question sideways. What my favorite part of the piece actually comes towards the very end, when practically the last time, the last time you hear just the rhythmic chant, bum 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 bum, the people, and then on the word united, he goes to a straight pure octave, which is maybe a little bit inside baseball, but it's really a kind of a marvelous moment that at that moment he has the single octave. Other than that, just most nervous walking on stage and the happiest once I'm done.
Thanks. Thank you very much. That was remarkable. A couple of comments. First, I once listened to Fred play this. I've heard Fred play this maybe 15 times. And one of those times I was sitting with Elliot Carter, and Elliot said, what's wrong with Fred? Why can't, what is this list shit? Why is he doing this? He's such a great composer. And it's interesting that he never got this and what Fred is doing. Anyway, but you said you heard Fred play it 90 minutes, and you didn't add that because when Fred plays it, he replays the piece. He improvises on the piece in a huge cadenza, that's his thing. And I've heard Ursula play it. I've heard a bunch of other people play it. Well, not a bunch of other people, a couple of other people play it. But I have to say that I've never heard anybody make this piece about the voice in the way that you do, which surprised me enormously. Because, so I really appreciated your construction of all the pieces and your laying out of, all of those elements and distinguishing them so that they become memory objects when the time comes to create this thing that happens in the last set. But in every other playing of this piece and in the score, the literal use of the voice seems completely gratuitous. And what happened with your use of the voice for me, and I think in the universe, is that all of this emotional energy in the piece escaped through a little hatch. And I understood finally what that voice can do there and actually what it means for the piece as a whole. I thought that was absolutely astounding. And thank you very much. And I could say a lot of other things, but I won't. I'll let other people talk.
You're very kind. I wish you were writing for the New York Times. Yeah, well, can we book this in New York? Yeah, the use of extra keyboard stuff at the piano can be really problematic. I teach a class in extended piano techniques and, getting people off the keyboard inside and making noises, and a lot of it has to, voice or whistling. That is always the most difficult with piano students, to get them to use their voice, with a very few exceptions. I had a fabulous student a few years ago who did Jeffsky's De Profundis, which is spoken and sung all the way through. But most of us, we play the piano because we don't like people to hear us talk. And so, yeah, it has to come somewhere. In the piece, he does set it up with the smashing of the lid and the other stuff. So, thanks. Thank you. When you were talking about Carter, there's something about composers have to do their particular thing, and that tends to make them less eager to hear other things. A wide variety of composers, of variety of tastes among composers. Some are very, very doctrinaire, and only doing my thing. We were talking about Georg Haas, who is an amazing guy who writes music completely unlike the music that David writes, and it's delightful to see David admiring somebody from that far off continent. But pianists, performers, they can afford to be promiscuous and sample the market more freely.
Can you say something about the internal roadmap that you use in order to keep track of where you are in the piece?
The fingers, and occasionally the fingers kind of like spin off a little bit. For me, a lot of immediate playing is just purely muscle memory. I mean, that muscle memory is tied in intimately with oral AU memory. It's tied in with intellectual memory. Obviously, there's the organization of the piece. I don't tend to think about that because, when you're playing the next note, it's a little bit too microscopic. There's a little bit, and some pianists more than myself, visual memory of actually looking at the score. But I've been playing the damn thing for 40 years now. No, that's not true. 30. Mostly it's in the fingers, and also when I learn, I'm a very slow learner. It takes me forever. I spent a year on this piece before I got it out in public, and a lot of it for me is really literally training the muscles to do the right thing. Now, in the course of that, of course, you have to ask what the right thing is, not just putting the finger on the A natural, but how you get there, what it means musically, what it would be if you were singing, and my technique is always changing, so I'm always kind of discovering that the fingers are doing a thing that I didn't suspect they would do. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. It's tied so closely to the actual sound, and it's really wrapped up inside that universe of sound and that kind of completely interior, non-verbal situation, which is sometimes emotional, sometimes intellectual, sometimes physical, and sometimes some weird combination of the three that's more than the sum of its parts. And then sometimes I was feeling like, can I play that next little lick? And sometimes I was feeling like, no, I didn't play that last little lick. Could please concentrate on what's coming up? Now, maybe I'm admitting too much here. I mean, when you talk about did I feel revolutionary, it's what I was saying earlier. It's this struggle that, you focus on the minutia. You try to remember why the big picture is there, but you have to keep doing what's needed at the moment. And, sometimes that's gratifying in a direct way, and sometimes it takes a little patience. I can hear you. It's a good hall for talk.
Yep, we have a mic here. We have a mic here.
Do you love that piece as much as it seemed?
That was somebody else. All right. You're next, I promise. It's a pretty good piece. Yeah, having played for 30 years, it has not gotten old yet. I've played some pieces that I won't name because people will go, oh, how can you not? That I got a little tired of, seemed to give up all their secrets. But this one, I keep coming back to it and going, yeah, it's worth playing again.
The question I wanted to ask is related to the issue of memory that was asked before, the muscle memory. Is there something structural about the piece that necessitated to be played without looking at the score? Or is that just your own habit?
That's just me. I mean, have I played it ever from the score. Some people have Zhevsky does himself, but he plays a million different pieces, and he's always writing a million new ones. For me, most pieces, if I feel ready to play them, they're memorized. A few exceptions, some things that are very sparse, some things that are extremely kind of stop and go, so there's no muscle memory to hold on to. But this one, by the time I was able to play it, that I'd want anybody to hear it. Some pianists can sit down and read it. Not me. Yeah.
This is actually a hot issue in classical music pedagogy, because it always was in the 19th century and 20th century that music was played from memory. And it was thought that this was something that showed your commitment to the music, that you were one with it, that it was the composer speaking through you. And so when I started in music school, I remember teachers coming out very radically saying, we must get back to having the music in front of us, because it shows that we, are being accurate, and it also reflects the kind of music that they were writing, music that was so complicated and so detail-oriented that it was important to be reminded of all of the little things in front of you. So, but I think it's really interesting that this is still, well, you have students. What do you do with them? Do you make them memorize, or?
For most pieces from the standard repertoire, yes. In fact, I started enforcing that very early on when I realized some of my students were coming in and sight reading. And that's a good way to make sure you don't have a student sight reading in a lesson. You just say, bring it memorized, otherwise it's not ready. Call me next week. I heard a story which I can't trace down. I have a feeling it goes back to Yale, actually, a Shakespeare sonnet seminar. Somebody might know who this story comes from. But the faculty directing the seminar said, we will go in with half a dozen students or a dozen students and sit and spend 2 hours on this sonnet. By the end of 2 hours, everybody in the room has it memorized, because you've spent so much time inside of it. What I tell my students is that is a good kind of ticker, road marker to measure yourself against, because they're young and they don't know what they can do yet. And then of course there are always pieces that just are not going to be memorized, because for me the complicated ones are easier to memorize. It's the ones that are kind of simple but then have, physically simple or sparse, but then have unpredictable changes kind of tucked inside of them. We were talking about Lee Hyla's music. I would never been able to memorize Basic Training. He wrote it for me, and it's just, huge patches of it, but I've never gone out and played it from memory.
How many pages is the actual score?
Oh, I should have brought it with me. I don't know. Yeah, no, it's well, there's usually a couple, 3 pages per variation, so that I'll take your word. 96, I'm told. You brought it in under 100, thankfully.
Thank you for the performance. For me, and maybe for other people too, one thing that was so moving for me is, that's something I've been chanting at demonstrations for my whole life. And I think it was really moving to see the dialogue between the piano, very complicated piece, and a chant that's very fundamental to demonstrations. And so I would just like to hear you muse on that, but just two kind of questions related to that. Do you see it as how does the fact that this is a chant that still takes place at every demonstration, in the United States? I didn't even know it was originally Chilean. Do you see yourself creating a dialogue between the way you're playing it and the way it's performed, at every demonstration? And I'm curious, and this is, forgive me if it's too personal, but if you go to demonstrations and chant that, does that inflect the way you play the music too?
Well, that's a different problem. My stepdaughter has, maybe that's the first time she heard it. she has a copy of my recording, but was at this concert on January 20th. And I don't remember if that was before or after, but she was at a demonstration. And she called home and she said, "You'll never guess what they're chanting." What was the second question? Oh, right. When I'm actually playing the piece, that's a little bit like maybe, I don't know, running the Xerox machine at the what do they call it? SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's kind of doing the work when I'm playing it. Programming it is more a matter of context, and the context will always be this. This will always be necessary. But I have to say that over the last 10 months, well, actually, going back to I was invited to play in Alaska in a concert series, which was about election music. And my concert was on, I forget the date now, but you get the idea. It was like Friday, November 9th. The mood in Fairbanks, at least that those people that came to the concert, was not exactly what the presenters were hoping for when they originally programmed the piece. Since then, I have tried to, with every public concert that I'm involved in, that I feel that I'm directing and is enough centered around me to give me a form, I have tried to make a point, whether it's with this piece or with other programming, even with conventional programming, that we artists, the ivory tower is being attacked with bulldozers along with the rest of the world, and that we simply can't sit back and say, well, Beethoven is above such thing. No, we're deep into it, and we have to be deep into it, and we have to make a point that we're deep into it, and refuse to let this current repugnant awfulness stand unchallenged. So I guess it's about programming.
How do you decide what you want to tackle? What next piece you're going to do? What moves you to choose something?
Oh my God, I started because my repertoire is not very big because I haven't learned enough, and I got out a piece of paper once and wrote, "Before you die," and started writing down pieces, and it just got on and on and on and on. I mean, I don't know. I have projects, and sometimes things come up and present an excuse for learning it. This piece I actually learned so long ago. I knew about it, and I had a student come from Japan playing it, and spent half a dozen lessons with her on it. And by the time we were done with that, I thought, maybe I should get on it and put my fingers on it. But nice thing about being a piano player is an awful lot of good music. You're not going to run out of good music to learn.
Steve, thank you so much.
Beer's getting warm.
Yeah, thank you.